Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking. And today I would like to talk about medieval warfare again, and we will talk about swords on the back. Now, a few months ago I talked about a similar topic. It was the topic of shields on the back. If you haven't seen that video, please make sure to watch it. It could be an interesting video to watch. I'll just place a link down below here. So if you haven't watched it and you do have time, please have a look. But today we are going to talk about a similar topic, but again, a bit different. We're going to talk about swords on the back. Were they actually carried on the back and used on the back in ancient times, or is it only a fictional thing? Is it only fantasy? Is it only Hollywood? Now, to answer this question, it's not that easy to answer this question, because I see that on the internet there are mainly two schools of thought. People who do not know much about historical warfare, medieval warfare, who just see films and play video games and think it's perfectly plausible, and then there are people who are into history and think it's completely nonsense. Now, I think that the best historical answer lies in between these two, because the real question that we should ask before asking this very wide question would be to ask what kind of sword we are talking about and what population we are talking about. Now, if we are talking about Europeans, so the overall idea of a man at arms or a knight, then it was never done. So European knights would never carry their swords on the back. So things that we see, for example, in games such as Dragon Age Origins or other games like that, like The Legend of Zelda, where we see European-looking characters carrying their swords on the back, and even Skyrim, I think you have that, then that is not historical, that is fantasy. And I will tell you why in a moment. But if we talk about other populations, then there were some populations that did use swords on the back. So, when we talk about these populations, we need to consider populations such as perhaps the Chinese, perhaps the Mongols, particularly Mongolian archers, mounted archers. It seems like that maybe they did carry some kinds of swords on their back, considering that it was their secondary weapon, and probably the Celts. On this matter, we find some information in the book The Ancient Celts, written by Professor Barry Cunliffe. Now, on page 94, the professor writes, all these pieces of equipment, so shields, spears, swords, mail armor, mentioned in the text, are reflected in the archaeological record and in the surviving iconography, though it is sometimes possible to detect regional variations. Among the Paracees of Yorkshire, for example, the sword was sometimes worn across the back and therefore had to be drawn over the shoulder from behind the head. So, the next question should be, why was it not done by medieval knights? Well, in the Middle Ages, swords had become quite longer if you compare them to swords used in ancient times, such as, for example, Roman era. Now, it is true, during Roman times there were longer swords like the spatha, but the most commonly used sword was the gladius, and the gladius was short. Now, and that's a similar situation if we talk about the Vikings, for example. Viking swords were generally speaking, again I'm generalizing here, but were generally speaking shorter than medieval swords. So as we enter the Middle Ages and we start developing better techniques, and therefore we start to knights and warriors started to prefer to have more reach than ancient warriors, and as battle techniques change, armors change, and therefore weapons also kind of develop and change. When we do have this kind of race between armors and weapons in Europe, then swords tend to become bigger until we get to the Zweihänder, the two-handed sword. Now, with very long swords, or with long swords, it is basically impossible to wear them on the back and unsheath them. And I will prove this to you in a moment. But with shorter sword, the thing perhaps could be done. We will test this now in a moment. So it is possible, as we said, the Celts did it but definitely was not done by Romans, for example. So we know that the gladius was mainly worn on the right side, because on the left side the Roman soldier would be carrying a scutum. So having a gladius on the left side would have made it difficult to unsheath it. So you would have had to move completely the shield away, which would probably be carried like this, and this would have been a problem in a very compact formation. So the Romans placed the gladius most of the times on the right and the pugio, the small dagger, on the left. So this helps us understand that the choice of placement of the sword had to do with its drawing. It needed to be in a place that made it very easy to draw. Okay, now that's a similar thing with medieval swords. Most of the times medieval swords would be carried on the left side, because we don't have that problem with formation anymore, and then you would unsheath them this way. That's the same with the Japanese samurai sword. Most of the time would have been carried on the left. But big swords, now let me show this, let me prove this point to you very quickly. We're going to do some tests now to see why it would be basically impossible with some swords, and whether it would be possible or not with shorter swords. So let's check. Now we begin with a very big sword. This is a replica of the Anduir, the sword of Aragon, and it's a very big sword. So we could compare it to a Zweihander or a claymore, perhaps, Scottish claymore. So if we place this on my back, we're talking about something like this, right? That's what we see in films and movies. Now the thing is that every time you see someone unsheathing in a movie or a film, you will notice that they begin the unsheathing, the drawing motion, then the filmmaker will change the scene. So you will see, for example, the enemy or the face of someone, and then the sword, when the film goes back to the main character, for example, who was unsheathing the sword, the sword would have already been drawn. The reason being, because if not, look what happens. That's the problem. The sword is limited to the length of my arm. So I think that the main thing that we need to consider is that in order to unsheath a sword from the back, it needs to be shorter, or a little bit shorter than your arm. So anything that goes beyond that measurement, it cannot be done. Again, look at this. You see? So the only way to actually unsheath this are a couple of things. Either I hold the blade, and if it's sharp, that I could do it, but I could also lose a couple of fingers in the process. Or the other thing that perhaps I could do is do this, then kind of lean back. Right, no, it's not even like this. Look at that. And the problem is, so it's impossible. So the real problem is the top of your scabbard, because I've seen people arguing that you sometimes you have those really partial scabbards, only the central part, or only the top, for example. So maybe people think that in that case you could do it, but no, because the problem is not the bottom of your scabbard, is the top. That's where the blade needs to go beyond, it needs to pass. So to do this, I really need to, well, this part here of the blade, the forte of the blade, is not very sharp normally, so I could hold it here and finish unsheathing it and then get it back. But you do realize that it would be a lot easier to simply, also because another problem is putting it back. I want to see you put back that's going to be a problem. I'm definitely not going to try it, because I'm not going to make it. So now, if the sword was here, now look at this. Much easier, even with a Zweihander. So, why? And it's very, very difficult to put it back. Other thing that Hollywood doesn't show in video games is you always see them put the sword back very easily. It's not, believe me. It's not completely impossible, but it's very, very difficult. And with a Zweihander, it's impossible unless you grip it from the blade. Let's try other swords. Now, this one pretty much has the length of a long sword, one-handed. Now, it's true that it's a wooden sword, so I don't have a scabbard for it, but still, I think the concept is very similar. No, it's very difficult. I could force it maybe and manage, but it would be very unnatural, and still probably not. I still need to grab it from the blade. And even if it was placed further down, that's not really the problem. The problem is my arm. So I actually want to try this again with the tie-hander. Let's try it again. Place it further down. Let's see if it works. So it's very down, okay? Same problem. Can't make it. No, doesn't work. Imagine if an enemy is running towards me in the meantime. Right, so long sword didn't work, zwei-hander didn't work. Just for fun. So, long sword didn't work, zwei-hander didn't work. Let's see something like this, like musketeers. I know that doesn't really make much sense to put it in the back, but we're still trying a few things. So, let's test it. Even worse. Impossible. And again, if I place it here, it is a lot easier to do. Let's try the katana now. So normally, as we know, katanas are placed on the side and unsheath it. Okay. Now the thing is, when you need to unsheath, if you have it here again, a little bit of a ninja style, and you want to unsheath it, same problem. Katana doesn't work. If I put it further down and I hold it in a very natural way from the from this part here, doesn't work. Again, not good for katana, and goodness gracious, I'm not touching the blade of a katana to unsheath it. So same problem again. Now let's try a short sword. I'll use a ninja to. Now please consider that this actually doesn't exist. Okay, did not exist historically. Ninja used katana or maybe wakizashi, but the idea of a straight sword specifically for ninja is not historical. It's from theatre, Japanese theatre. But still, this is good for our example. So let's have a look. It's a short sword. So let's see if this one works. So with a short sword, oh gosh, I could do it. So it could work for a short sword. So having seen this, and let me do it another time. Actually, that was fun. So it's in the scabbard. There you go. So it works. I still prefer the side one because I still think it's much more effective, but if you really need to carry it on the back and need to unsheath it, at least with a short sword, it could be done. So I think that even in historical cases, for those populations who did have a sword on the back, that it would have had to be a short sword pretty much of this length in order to work. So the whole concept here then is that it depends what sword we're talking about. For long swords, I don't think it would be historical unless they were simply carrying it. And that's a very similar concept that I already talked about this actually on the shield on the back video, that it depends on what situation. If you are carrying your sword because you need to, for a march, for example, or you need to carry it to another place and you're 100% sure that you're not going to be attacked, if such a case would exist, or if you simply already have a sword here and you just need to carry another one, then it would have made sense to place it on your back. But again, if that's the only sword you have and you're talking to me, of course I'm going to prefer to have it on my side because at least I can unsheath it. Well, I hope that this video kind of cleared things up, and please let me know what you think about this. Please make sure to always divide history and fantasy. For gaming mechanics, it looks good, that's absolutely fine, but let us not take gaming and merge it into historical reality, because remember that during an actual war, battle or duel, there is only one priority, and it's not the looks, it's how effective something that has been chosen or a tactic is. That what is more effective will be implemented, what is less effective and just simply looks good will not. Thank you very much for watching, and remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye.